Lifting each other as we rise always gives me hope. Giving hope to others has been the greatest gift for me because it all starts with hope.
This is Max Rameau, strategist, theorist, author, and organizer with Pan-African Community Action, and you are listening to The Next World. On this show, we explore and celebrate the work of poor people's movements, particularly in the U.S. We highlight innovative and powerful organizing campaigns and community building led by women, LGBTQ folks, Black communities, and other people of color that are pushing the boundaries and have the potential to transform society. Today on the show, a special panel discussion. How can communities build power in the face of colonization, natural disasters, and corporate profiteering? In Puerto Rico and the Hawaiian island of Molokai, communities have advocated for a future that prioritizes care, democratic control, and resilience. The panelists are Keani Rawlins-Fernandez of the Maui County Council, Ruth Santiago of We Want Sun, Guillermo Sol Initiative, and Todd Yamashita of Hoahu Energy Cooperative, a community-owned and managed energy co-op. The moderator is Nikki Franco of Partners for Dignity and Rights. Let's go into the panel now.
I want to welcome you all. This is a webinar that we are putting together here at Partners for Dignity and Rights. If you are not familiar with our organization, we are a national organization that works with base building organizations, coalition networks, grassroots groups, working on many different issues from co-governance, worker rights, education equity, public goods, expanding democracy, and more. And we're bringing you all this webinar on behalf of our new social contract, which is focusing on co-governance, specifically policy and organizing models that work either inside or outside of government to shift governing powers towards people who are directly impacted and who have the biggest stake in making sure that our communities and our societies work for everyone. If you are unfamiliar to that term co-governance that I've thrown around a little bit so far, for us, co-governance is a collection of participatory models and practices in which government and communities work together through either formal or informal structures to make collective policy decisions and co-create programs to meet community needs, and to also ensure that those policies and programs are co-implemented effectively. For us, a prerequisite for co-governance is the existence of community-based organizations, civic associations, worker centers, tenant organizations, or other organizations that are member-driven and member-led. As we all know, the climate crisis is deepening and impacting all of our realities. And in this, the issue of energy is becoming more and more urgent every day. And although we know that energy is a human right and we know that it should be sustainable, reliable, and affordable, that isn't necessarily the case. And it isn't necessarily the case for communities that are most impacted, be it working class, Black, Brown, Indigenous communities, which lends us to think that we need local control over energy choices, like where it comes from, how much does it cost? And energy democracy is one of those tools that focuses on energy that is decentralized, democratized, and redistributed. And because energy is so often included and the decisions around energy are so often including various government entities, be it local and state agencies, energy commissions, and state legislation, we do recognize that government's a terrain that we simply cannot ignore. We have to struggle within it and wield power in it. And co-governance is one of those important strategies towards energy democracy. It speaks directly to the need for community input and decision-making power in these choices that affect each of us in the most basic level, whether the lights are on, whether we stay warm in the winter, whether we can access internet, cook for our families, and so much more. And everyone should have a say about where their energy comes from, who controls it, and how it's paid for, which makes me feel very excited for this webinar because each panelist here has worked in many different ways towards establishing and making energy democracy more of a reality in Puerto Rico and Molokai. I want to introduce our speakers today. Ruth Santiago is a renowned environmental lawyer and activist who has been fighting on so many fronts in Puerto Rico, pushing back on dirty fossil fuel plants that have been polluting neighborhoods for years, advocating for a stronger community say on the public utility, and fighting against disaster capitalism post Hurricane Maria, and demanding that billions of FEMA dollars go to the communities that need them to build sustainable energy systems instead of corporations whose only interest is making money. We also have Keani Rawlins-Fernandez, who's a Kupayana of Molokai, a descendant of the first Polynesians that made Hawaii home. She's a member of the Maui County Council, where she holds the Molokai residency seat and represents everyone county-wide. She has fought to ensure that her community's voice is at the center of decision-making and has been advocating for local control over their energy on Molokai. And lastly, but certainly not least, we are joined by Todd Yamashita, who is a fourth-generation resident of Molokai and helped found the Hoahu Energy Cooperative in Molokai, which is committed to creating resilient, sustainable, equitable, and culturally conscious energy for all. We can give them a warm welcome. If we were all in the same space, it would be a room full of applauses. Very, very excited. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for saying yes and being part of this conversation. I think I want to start off with you, Ruth. And this one's a personal question too, because I'm also Puerto Rican. Many folks actually don't know what I'm about to say, but Puerto Ricans actually face some of the highest energy costs in the country. And of course, we know that poorer communities, Black and Brown communities, are bearing the brunt of the toxic pollution generated by the fossil fuel industry on the island. It's a question for you, Ruth. What would energy democracy look like in Puerto Rico? What needs to change? What do we need to focus on?
So hi, everyone. Hi, Nikki. Thanks for the question. So I want to say I'm based here in Salinas, Puerto Rico, which is the site of the largest electrical facility in PR, and it's adjacent to the site of the AES coal-fired power plant. Between the two of them, those are the most polluting power plants in Puerto Rico. And there's another two big polluting power plants in southwestern Puerto Rico. So a lot of the dirty energy generation in Puerto Rico, very centralized, is overburdening communities, mostly in southern Puerto Rico, and providing energy mostly for like the San Juan metro area in the north. And so, of course, we have, a classic environmental injustice situation of the overburdening of the communities that are close to these plants in every way that you might imagine, not just you think of what's coming out of the stacks, but also think about, especially with the AES coal-fired power plant, coal ash waste, which is very toxic combination of heavy metals and radioactive isotopes. And think of water pollution, think of thermal discharges into our nearby bay. We have, of course, Puerto Rico is an archipelago with 44 municipalities that are coastal. And so, these plants discharging all kinds of pollutants into the water certainly does not help the situation. And so I think energy democracy in our context here in Puerto Rico, and especially after the experiences with not only Hurricane Maria, Irma Maria, the hurricanes in 2017, but also Hurricane Fiona in 2019, is that communities need to become energy literate, learn about energy issues, and become participants, active agents, not just passive consumers of energy. And some people use the term prosumers, that is producers and at the same time consumers of energy. And of course, that I think that's the main element, right, of becoming literate, aware, educated, and part of energy generation and distribution and ownership. And we do have a public utility here. It's called the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, that now is basically in name only, because a lot of the functions of PREPA, as we know it, have been stripped off and privatized in the past few years. And the thinking behind that was that it was going to make the system better, somehow more efficient, and provide better service. That has not turned out to be the case at all. And so, we need to continue to work with organized communities. We're doing pilot, especially rooftop solar projects, and we have civil society proposals for the radical transformation of the electric system here. That, of course, is based on not just the technological switch and, overcoming this narrative that only big centralized, foreign corporations can be part of electric systems or can determine decisions in electric supply and distribution, et cetera, but that the narrative now no longer holds in light of a lot of things that involve not just technology, but also governance issues, right? Communities being able to participate in the actual decision making. So I guess I should leave it there for now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really rich start. Thank you, Ruth. And it makes me think a lot about what's possible in our community's transformation when we are able to actually organize towards what we know we deserve, but also this idea of challenging like these neo-colonial narratives that we can only power our communities by these foreign corporations, when actually we know that they're quite inefficient. And yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that point up. My next question, Keani, we know that Puerto Rico and Hawaii have some parallels, but there's also different contexts. And I think that's what makes this conversation so expansive. So, Keani, can you tell us a little bit of Molokai, the island that you represent on the Maui County Council? What's the community like? What makes it unique? And what is your vision for energy democracy? And
Mahalo for that question. Aloha mai kako, mai Molokai nui hina. And mahalo for those new terms, Ruth. I love them. I'm going to add them to my list. So Molokai is, the Molokai, the island that has fed me, that has nourished me, is one of the 7 inhabited islands in the Hawaiian archipelago. That includes over 130 islands, atolls, reefs, shallow bank, shoals, and seamounts stretching over 1,500 miles. It's one of 4 of the islands in our county, and it's the only county like it in Hawaii. There are no traffic lights on our island, and it's like stepping back in time by 100 years for those that live on the other islands. And we also pay some of the highest rates in Hawaii and compared to those in America. Our population is around 7,500 people. Over 60% are Native Hawaiian compared to the statewide percentage of about 21. Most of our community members are from families that have lived here for generations, like Todd's, including those who were brought here to work on sugar plantations. This enables us to continue to practice the practices of our kupuna, our ancestors, and to maintain kinship to our aina, our land, our home. Here it is said that Aina is chief. The Aina is our ancestor, both metaphorically and literally, where the bones of our ancestors are indistinguishable from the soil which feeds us. Our ancestors continue to feed us. I highlight this as foundational to our culture. This relationship informs how decisions shaping our future is made. Ikawa ma mua, ikawa ma hope. Our future is found in our past. Our vision for energy justice, energy democracy, and energy independence are rooted in our shared cultural values, including malama aina, where we are not generating energy at the expense of the health and well-being of our environment, including the flora and fauna, recognizing that we are all connected and play a role in bringing life to each other. Ola. Aloha ke kahi, we care for each other and ensure that we are collectively taking care of each other. Aina momona, and we plan and cultivate a future of abundance for 7 generations and beyond. Today, by building the systems, both physical infrastructure and social structures necessary. This includes proactive community-based planning for energy systems owned and managed by our community, decisions made here, locally, rates being set by our people, ensuring equity, dividends to our community, ensuring that proper investment is made into the physical infrastructure of our energy infrastructure to keep our children, to our grandparents, and all generations in between safe. And I'm sure Todd will build upon that for the vision of Molokai. Mahalo for that question.
Keani, thank you so much for it's a really beautiful reminder of also how we're sort of remembering a lot of our ancestors' tradition and what it means to be stewards of the land that our folks have been doing for a long time, and how that sort of can empower us now to do what we must do. But yeah, I know, Todd, you're going to build on this. And Todd, you were one of the founders of the Hoahu Energy Cooperative in Molokai. And for folks who are not familiar, can you tell us just a little bit about why was it needed? Like, why did you all birth that? And explain a little bit of how it's working today.
So, why as a community did we get into renewable energy, and how did we do that? Why is that important? The reason why, I think you heard it from Keani, you heard her passion. Molokai is a really unique place with a really unique cultural heritage, and it's really one of the last unspoiled places here in Hawaii. The other reason why is because we're getting crushed, and I know Puerto Rico is very similar to Molokai. We're about as vulnerable as we have ever been. And, we look at the fires in Lahaina on Maui next door that have killed over 100 people, and that was likely caused by the power grid. And we also look at the hurricanes that Puerto Rico has experienced, and it's trending in the wrong direction. So that's our reason why we're motivated in that direction. Luckily, during COVID, we had a lot of downtime as a community. We used Zoom to get together, and there was a project that was being released by our utility, and it was a community solar project. And we all took a look at that, and we asked some pretty critical questions. Questions like, why are these projects, that are so critical to our existence as a community, why are they planned, financed, and operated by outsiders? And that led us to the next ultra critical question, which is, as a community inexperienced in renewable energy that has no infrastructure and support within renewable energy, is this something that we can try and do? Is it, and we actually use this community solar project, which is 2.5 megawatts. That was our catalyst. We used it as our catalyst to bring community members together. It took hundreds of community hours to plan and bring together. And long story short, about 2.5 years later, we have 2.5 megawatts of community energy, which is scheduled to start construction as early as next year. And just a little bit about the project itself. Community energy is this idea that renters and other low income people, they're the last to access renewable energy, right? And so the concept is, if we build the solar project all in one place, can we make subscriptions available, whether you rent or own a home? And without having to build that system on your house, it allows you to take advantage of renewable energy and help bring the cost down to a significant amount. So anyway, I'm going to stop there because we have a lot to talk about. This is my favorite subject. So I hope that answered most of your question.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you. Yeah, it's really exciting to sort of hear what's possible and what's already happening, what's emerging. And very similar to your point, Todd, there is so many similarities between Molokai and what's happening in Puerto Rico. Ruth, I want to bring it back to you and sort of weave in your perspective also. But I think so much of what's happening in both of these places, right? Not just in Puerto Rico, but in both of these places are sort of serving as a sort of forecast and a warning for us in the States and on the continent of what the future holds. And we know that that means bigger and more frequent natural disasters, which are combined with disaster capitalism. And I want to hear a little bit. I mean, we've already started to get into the ways in which our communities are fighting back, but Ruth, I want to hear a little bit about sort of how are folks in Puerto Rico building power and actually combating this. And I was curious if you could tell us a little bit about Queremos Sol and the initiative and what y'all have been building.
Sure. So I had mentioned about our very centralized, fossil-fired, import-dependent electric system, undemocratic electric system. And so obviously, even before the very traumatic hurricanes we had in 2017, the groups throughout Puerto Rico were looking for alternatives and started meeting and talking amongst ourselves and with faculty members at the University of Puerto Rico and other academics, other allies, about proposals to transform our electric system. And that's how really we started participating in integrated resource planning at the newly created Energy Bureau in Puerto Rico, and proposing distributed renewable energy as one sort of the most important alternative for the technical transformation of our electric system. And when I say distributed renewable energy, I'm talking mostly about rooftop solar because of the advantages that that has. But that, of course, coupled with battery energy storage systems and energy efficiency programs, energy conservation, and as I mentioned earlier, of course, energy literacy, because we know that people who are not in the energy field need to become sort of educated or about handling these like rooftop solar systems and the batteries, of course. And so after Hurricane Maria, so that was something we were working on prior to the hurricanes. But after Hurricane Maria, there's all of this interest in Puerto Rico. And, after that devastation of the electric grid, and of course, the deaths that were related to many times lack of power. There were, I think everyone knows, months and months when we did not have power, and in some cases close to a year. And so, of course, that led to a lot of different proposals. We've had proposals from everywhere. I've been at airports and run into people who tell me that they have a proposal to solve the electric system in Puerto Rico, which is sort of interesting. So locally, we just used a lot of the information that especially faculty at the University of Puerto Rico had already developed, had already looked into, and zeroed in on two basic parts of the Queremos Sol proposal, or in English, it's We Want Sun. You can look it up. It's online, pr.org. And one is the governance aspect of democratizing our electric power utility, our public utility, with the participation of different sectors within Puerto Rican society, including workers, including communities, including environmental groups, et cetera, and making it more responsive to the public interest. And then also, of course, including initiatives by communities themselves, organized communities doing projects in conjunction with PREPA. And then on the technical side, I mentioned we are talking a lot about distributed renewable energy as opposed to utility scale. And I'll give you an example. Just today, we were at a march this morning because Puerto Rico as an archipelago has limited land space. And a lot of the developers, foreign corporations, are coming in and wanting to use that limited coastal plain that we have, very narrow coastal plain that surrounds the mountain range in the middle, to a site utility scale or industrial scale solar, especially. And so communities that are impacted by this and people who are concerned about sustainability in terms of food production and about the food, energy, water nexus are concerned about these huge utility scale projects that often, and what we've seen so far, is that they totally eliminate vegetation, alter the terrain, compact the earth, and make changes to the topography that really creates increased flood levels and increased stormwater discharges into nearby communities, and carry lots of sediments that then run into our bay, especially here in Salinas and Guayama. And so renewable is not always sustainable. It's not always necessarily something that will help communities. In Queremos Sol, we state very clearly that we favor distributed renewable energy like rooftop solar, on-site solar, using the built environment to site this energy infrastructure, and of course with community participation.
I love the reminder that renewable isn't always sustainable, because I think we're also seeing how a lot of these terms are being sort of co-opted and being manipulated by some of the corporations that are actually doing the most harm. So appreciate that. I mentioned at the sort of top of the webinar and mentioned this word co-governance that we talk a lot about here at sort of our new social contract. And we often talk about co-governance as one of the strategies towards building a multiracial democracy. And Keani, for you, I'm curious, as someone who is actually a council member, is actually serving in government, how do you sort of see the role of government? A lot of our folks might have distrust because of the experiences that we've seen. So sort of how do you navigate that, and where do you see the opportunities for both government and communities to work together and actually make energy democracy a reality?
Mahalo, and thank you for not calling me a politician. I appreciate that. So my overall philosophy of government is community leads and government supports. Government needs to protect community interests and processes from exploitation of this capitalistic system that we find ourselves in. Corporations, that maximize dividends to their shareholders at the expense of our community's safety by not properly investing in infrastructure, by increasing rates to unaffordable levels, not maximizing efficiencies to save on cost, and then putting it on the ratepayers, being forced to invest in clean renewable energies by the government because they're unwilling to do it on their own. As Todd mentioned earlier, that the Energy Corporation has a monopoly on energy here. Government's role is to, support improving archaic, harmful systems, like the utility scale projects that poison our environment, that Ruth is mentioning. On Molokai, we're looking at public ownership of 20% of our energy demands here on Molokai. And this first project, the CBRE, Community-Based Renewable Energy Project, is going to include folks with low to moderate income, renters, those who don't own their own properties, so do not have the decision-making power to install rooftop solar, for example. And with the support that we've received, we'll be able to reduce the costs to our community members. Government should also resource initiatives towards renewable energy projects, microgrids. We developed a climate action plan that recommends investing in microgrants to support these efforts. And government should also modernize policies that support our community's efforts toward things like wheeling, for decentralizing, for microgrids and nanogrids, rooftop solar, but also solar that's not necessarily on rooftop. And I forget what it's called right now, but I'm sure Todd can say it. But so funding, policies, and facilitating discussions. As a council member, sometimes I have access to those that have access to other funding in the federal government, for example, and then bringing those people here, bringing different partners here so that our community is empowered, that our community, our ideas, come to life. So that I think that's the role that those in government should play. Mahalo.
Thanks so much, Keani. I think when we think of how much money and resources do exist, but how they're mismanaged, how we just don't have access to them, I think for a lot of us, it sort of brings the alarm that communities should be leading that communities should have a seat at the table, and that those funds, be it federal or state or even local, should actually be funding sort of energy and just the communities that we actually deserve. Todd, I want to bring it to you. Of course, we've been talking a lot about just all things energy democracy, but specifically, I think all of y'all have been highlighting this over energy and energy decisions and energy choices to sort of combat these energy monopolies. So I guess for you, why is that so important? And how do you feel like the Hoahu Energy Cooperatives is an example of that?
Great question. I really love why questions. So thank you for all the why questions. Yeah, I'm going to start off by, just telling a short little story. About 15 years ago, it was announced in Hawaii state media that our statewide utility would be making Molokai the first Hawaiian island to be 100% renewable. And it was a surprise to us, no consultation or anything else, obviously. And their target date for that was 2020. So here we are 4 years later, and we are 15% renewable just because of rooftop solar. There's not a single grid scale project here on the island. So, simply put, if we don't do this ourselves, the same system of extraction, whether it's extracting oil or extracting the people, it's just going to continue. And if we don't help ourselves, no one else is going to help us. You have to remember, Hawaii has over 200 years of history of being colonized by missionaries and others that, are really just after resources. And so the why is because we have, I would say, that moral intent to do it the right way. And when I say right, I mean right by the land and right by the people. And I want to say the most important reason is for us to all be examples of community indigenous success in energy is because people here are ready. I think the world is ready. And under the current burden of energy oppression, we all need inspiration. We all need a model of hope that shows us that we can. And I think in terms of that, it makes our work all the more important because we might only be working for a population of 7,000 people, but we're 65% indigenous here on Molokai, right? And we realize this isn't necessarily rocket science in terms of the technology, but the real work, the real hard part is not necessarily the technology, but how you connect the most vulnerable people to that technology. And I think that's a broken promise of up to this point. And it's really up to the small, vulnerable communities like us to fight like hell, to make it successful, to make it work for us. I hate to say it, but it's just is not worth waiting around for somebody else to figure it out. We have to do it ourselves.
Yeah, I love those reminders, Todd, because I think I know I don't only speak for myself, but I, as an organizer, have found hope and optimism and sort of energy by seeing some of the work that you all have done in some of the hardest conditions, and same for our Puerto Rican comrades as well. And, it is true. I think you're not just building a model for maybe 7,000 residents. There's people of oppressed and colonized communities all over the world also looking to one another and reflecting off of one another on strategies on how do we actually build power against all odds. So I really appreciate that reminder. I've gotten to ask a lot of questions, and there are some questions that folks have already answered, and I want to kind of pose them to you all, and also want to encourage folks that are listening in and tuning in that now is a great time to drop in your questions in the Q&A box so we can have our brilliant panelists answer those before we move into some closing reflections. I think the first question is, Ruth, the question's from Mirna Morales. Thank you for all your work. Weren't there fires happening at the Luma power plants in 2019? And Ruth, if you could just maybe talk a little bit on who Luma is for folks that don't know.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Mirna. So Luma Energy is a joint venture created by Qantas Services and ETCO Canadian Utilities, two big companies that lobbied heavily after Hurricane Maria to get this historic amount of disaster recovery funding from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, to use to restore power. Both that, and there's an emergency section of it, and there's a permanent works. And Luma was created to basically, and this is in the statements to investors, right, that the company put out to take advantage of this historic amount of funding that's available for the Puerto Rico electric system, which started with about 9.6 with a B and is now up to about 19.3 or so billion. And that does not include some new funding that is just coming in for so-called temporary but new gas-fired generation units. So, the company saw a huge business opportunity, and yes, they decided to come in. It was a newly created company, and the two parent corporations are really, they're transmission and distribution companies, especially build long distance, high voltage transmission lines in the US and Canada and the continents, and had no experience in an island context. But they were granted the contract to operate the transmission and distribution systems here in Puerto Rico. And we now talk about Hurricane Luma, because the service has been, Mirna mentions the fires at the substations. We also need to talk about the power outages, just as bad or worse than we had before this privatization. We now have a whole new problem that I barely was aware of before, which has to do with voltage fluctuations and damaging, for example, hospital equipment and just household appliances throughout. It's another disaster that's upon us. And as Keani mentioned in her first statements, that reinforces the need to relate to energy in a different way, in a holistic way, and become and empower ourselves as communities and people here and residents of Puerto Rico to become agents of change in this energy sector.
Thanks for that, Ruth. I see some more questions coming in. There's one, and I don't want to put any of y'all on the spot because this is a bit of a complex question, but I think all of y'all have some reflections on this. Net Devo, sorry if I mispronounced your name, asked, how do you promote energy democracy when there's already a publicly owned utility that's not serving the public good? Is there room for well-meaning small renewable companies that are privately owned? Todd.
I want to take that question. Is there room? I would say the way that business is done right now in the energy market, it's not meant for the little guys. It's not meant for the communities. And there really isn't a lot of room, I would say. But I'm gonna throw this out there. I've heard, Ruth talk about disasters, and we just saw what happened to the neighboring island on Maui, the big fires that they had out there. I look at these big disruptive natural disasters and similar things. And oftentimes it takes those things to really shift the bigger picture. And unfortunately, there are victims in those processes. But I look towards technology, and within technology, there is an opportunity for disruption. Right. And I look towards that disruptive behavior of technology as a potential for the same potential as a natural disaster. Right. And in terms of monopolistic, utility, such as what we have here, Hawaii Electric, I'll just ask a question, is there a moment that can be very disruptive for the utility, but not necessarily disruptive for our community or our end users, right? And I think that time is coming. You see the cost of especially rooftop inverters, storage, panels, all of those prices continue to drop. And already it is much faster, much easier, quicker to bring electricity to where the people are, bring it to their homes, right? And if you can do that much better than the utility does, you have an opportunity to create disruption, right? And if you are supporting the poorest portions of your community first, when that disruption takes place, your most vulnerable are already supported with the renewable systems and other projects and whatnot. So anyway, kind of going down a rabbit hole, but I think that if we band together, if we can continue to share our examples of success, and we can be strategic. It takes strategy and bold leadership, courageous leadership in order to make things like this happen. But I think the opportunity is there right now.
Exciting. And yeah, we know that even in crises, there's room for opportunities for transformation. Want to pass it. I think this question, I don't think it's just for you, Ruth. I think all of y'all. But Yanni Marie asked, are there any plans or talks about combating against corrupt solar companies that make it impossible for disadvantaged communities to afford switching to solar, and holding these companies accountable?
Hey, so thanks for the question, Yanni. Yeah, let's see. I guess I'll stick with the hurricane model, right? And so we also have, in addition to the so-called natural hurricanes, as I mentioned, we have the Hurricane Luma. We also have a Hurricane Sonova, which is a rooftop solar company, for-profit company, that has implemented the most predatory business practices you can imagine. One of the things that they did, for example, was that they started selling systems here in Puerto Rico, a solar system, solar panels, or leasing them, I should say, better. It's a lease agreement, like 25-year leases for solar panels prior to the hurricanes that were not coupled with batteries. And because this was something new, people did not realize that they would not have power if the main grid was down and they did not have batteries. But Sonoma, of course, knew this and did it anyway. And then after Hurricane Maria, when people did not have power because they did not have batteries, Sonoma was charging people for energy service that they were not receiving, right? So very problematic business practices that we've seen with lots of private enterprises. And this is why we advocate for the reforming of our public utility and being able to provide universal access to distributed renewable energy, potentially life-saving energy on rooftops, nearby, on parking lots, etc., so that people will not be without power and will not be, victims of these predatory businesses, which is what we've seen. That's been our experience.
Yes, Keani, please.
Mahalo. I wanted to add a little story, kind of a big victory for Molokai. So the Public Utilities Commission, the State Public Utilities Commission governs energy as a utility in Hawaii. And when the community-based renewable energy, which was the RFP, which was mandated by the government, was put out, the energy monopoly, Hawaiian Electric, attempted to bid on this RFP against the communities group that was intending to put in a bid for the RFP. RFP stands for Request for Proposal for this larger scale solar project. And our community, with Hoahu and Clean Energy Hui, with other partners that really helped us gain our energy literacy, went to the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, and advocated for ourselves, for our community, that this was not right. This was not the spirit and intention of the government for HECO to build this energy, this solar farm itself, especially since there was a viable group in the community intending to do it itself. And in that PUC hearing, I'm gonna give that victory to our community. And HECO, Hawaiian Electric, withdrew its intention to put in a self-build team to bid on it itself on this project. And the group that remained was Ho, and we're on our way. Our community is on its way to owning that project.
Yes, thank you for sharing just like those concrete wins that I don't think we should downplay, that have like this long-term impact of, especially in these bidding processes that we know are so rigged and usually always go to the big foreign corporation. And, there's a lot of backdoor deals. And Ruth, I also wanted to affirm, you talked about how this is also sort of potentially life-saving, energy. And I recall seeing what was happening in Puerto Rico when hospitals were losing energy and didn't have power, and older folks weren't able to actually, use their medical devices because of no energy. So I just want to affirm like how it really is a matter of life affirming in every way and life saving. I think we'll have time for maybe one more question, which I think any of y'all would be amazing at answering. But anonymous question: thank you all for sharing your perspective on community needs and government responsibilities. As an anti-capitalist organizer focused on removing lead service lines in a primarily Black community, I would like to know if you think there's any way to ethically work with or have the same dynamic between communities and the private sector. I struggle with this and would be interested in understanding your insight.
I really forgot to highlight and mention the fact that Oahu, in parallel of this, community solar project, has created a workforce. In the past 3 years, we've had 3 cohorts, and, we have about a dozen students a year, and most of those students are Hawaiian, and many of them live off grid. And what it's done, which Ruth has talked about, the importance of, in terms of energy awareness. We now have this small army of people on our island that knows so much more about electricity. They're active, they're engaged, And I think workforce is a really great way to engage your local community, people who are hungry for work, people who are hungry for knowledge, get them involved, create that workforce that's from within the community. And as they become active, as they become those people who do those jobs and make those decisions, they will advocate for the integrity of their community. I truly believe that.
And I just wanted to add, in case it wasn't clear earlier, that Ho'o is not a for-profit. It's a co-op. And that the workforce initiative that Todd is talking about, some of that funding came from the county. So when I was talking earlier about resourcing our community through grants so that we are truly empowering our own community to control our destiny, to own, manage, maintain, repair our own projects, all of these things.
Thanks y'all for that. I feel like I'm learning so much, and I feel like I'm continuously learning from y'all's work. Unfortunately, we don't have all day, as amazing this has been, and I want to sort of maybe pivot a little bit to some closing reflections. In this webinar, in this conversation, y'all have talked about really hard things, right? We're talking about extraction, and that creates a lot of trauma and hardship in our communities. It's also, we're up against some serious opponents, right? Like some powerful corporations and really corrupt systems. So we've talked about a lot of challenging things. And I think the work that organizers do and community leaders do is tiring. It's thankless in a lot of ways, and it's exhausting. And I'm curious for each of y'all, sort of looking ahead, where does your sort of like the seeds of hope lie for you right now?
Mahalo. Thank you so much for this question. When we, picked up and continued this effort on Molokai years ago, we didn't know what it would look like today. In spite of the detractors and colonial forces and years of other people telling a story about Molokai that wasn't true, but told to force us to assimilate and to give up our resources, a story that sought to extinguish our light and our spirit. This story was necessary to get us to support proposed projects that wasn't in our community's best interest, like the project Kanoho Helm spearheaded the fight against. The Big Wind project that proposed to build massive windmills on Hawaiian homestead land that would kill off native seabirds and that would connect to Oahu, a neighboring island, through an undersea cable, and all that energy would not come to Molokai. It would go away, leaving us the burden and environmental injustice and negative impacts to benefit someone somewhere else. This project sought to exploit us. And now we are telling our own story, a story of the brilliance of our ancestors, a story of a resilient and abundant future that includes energy, land back, water back, food independence. And, I'm constantly inspired by Auntie Laurie Buchanan, Todd and his brother Matt, and so many others who continued to question those for years, who sought to exploit our island for their own profits without any community consultation. Folks like Leilani Chow, who spearheaded this work of Molokai Community Energy Resiliency Action Plan, and our community, like Ruth was saying regarding energy literacy. When we first started, we didn't know energy, but a group of us met twice a year for over a year to become energy literate. And now it's said nobody knows energy and the grid like Molokai. And this has in turn, reignited the light for other communities that have been saddled with the burdens and environmental and energy injustice. And we have served as a model for others. And our community is so happy to help, such as Wai'anae on Oahu and Lahaina on Maui. Lifting each other as we rise always gives me hope. And hope is contagious. Giving hope to others has been the greatest gift for me because it all starts with hope. Mahalo.
Thank you, Keani. So what gives me hope is that we can see now that this is doable, that the radical transformation of the electric system in Puerto Rico is doable on not just a technological level, but also watching communities, organized communities who a few years ago knew nothing about solar energy, do a rooftop solar project and run it is amazing, and certainly provides a lot of hope, as Keani said. I mean, we're facing tremendous challenges, but every day it's clearer that what our captured public utility is doing, and captured by big private corporations that I guess contribute to campaign funds, et cetera, is not in the public interest. And that we're getting a clearer view of what is. And we've got civil society proposals, not just queremos sol, we want sun, others, right? Where people are sort of talking the same language, speaking about the transformation involving, organized communities and the public sector, and that the huge amount of public funds, and just having every element present except the politicians online to make it move in that direction. And I guess, yeah, that means we certainly have to work harder, but I think we have a lot more hope that this can be done.
I run on hope. I don't have very much in my life, but I survive on hope. My hope is that the status quo that is in energy right now is that people like us are able to shift it. The status quo right now is that the energy is for the privileged. Energy is all about extraction. And, I realize this work that Keani and I have described that was done in the past 2 or 3 years, that it's really been, if you were to really look at it in a nutshell, we've really reverse engineered how the request for proposal project, works. What we've essentially done is we've put the community first. We've put the community at the top, right? We've told our leaders and our people from the community up, this is what our needs are. This is what is acceptable for us. And these are what our strategies are. And so my hope is that this becomes a new status quo because it makes sense. And my other hope is that I come from a family of engineers. I ended up being an artist. I don't know why, but what my father and my grandfather have taught me about engineering is not about electricity and all those technical things. Engineers, at their base are there to help people and to solve problems. And it's my hope that energy and renewable energy is able to reshift itself towards those super important qualities that support our communities and everyone else. And I think we're getting there. So that's it. Thank you.
Yes. Ruth, Todd, Keani, just want to express deep, deep, deep gratitude. I'm in awe because I think on one end, you guys have been able to describe very concrete strategies on what it is that actually means to build power against, these big corporations, against the status quo. On another front, I think you all are very much sort of embodying so much of the ancestral wisdom and knowledge of what it means to protect community, be in right relationship with one another and the land. And I think on this front of hope, I feel very much inspired with hope and optimism when I hear you all speak and when I learn more about the work that all of you lead and are up to. And it also reminds me that, yes, as calcified as the status quo is, as powerful as these corporations are, at the same time, I think we're in a very historical moment where status quo is also trembling, right? I think we're all seeing that each day that passes, each year that passes. And I think the bold leadership and sort of just organization that all of you all are up to is not only necessary, I think it's just gonna be what transforms the possibility of status quo to more liberation. So I really want to thank you all. For everyone that tunes in from wherever you are, thank you all for joining. Stay connected with us at Partners for Dignity and Rights. Stay connected with New Social Contract. Please follow the work of all our amazing panelists. This is one of many conversations we'll continue to have around amazing topics. And thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you all.
Good to see you.
Okay, that's our show. Thank you for listening to The Next World. I'm Max Rameau. You can find out more about my work at pacapower.org. That's PACA power.org. You can read more in depth on many of the issues we talked about today on the Partners for Dignity and Rights website, dignityandrights.org. We'll be back with another episode of Next World soon. Until then, please tell your friends about us and help us spread the word about this podcast. Goodbye for now, and remember, organize, organize, organize.